There are a whole lot of characters in the world and franchise of How to Train Your Dragon that get a whole heap of praise from the fandom at large. I'm talking the likes of Hiccup or Astrid, Toothless or Stoick. Those really big name characters that make their mark on the story and who garner the most attention both for their positive traits within the universe but also for the way in which they've been written. To illustrate what I mean, I'll just take a couple of these characters, right? Hiccup and Stoick are probably the best two to choose because they're the most developed. Positive in-universe qualities for Hiccup would be, well, much of his actual personality. He's a kind and wise person who single-handedly reconciles the dragons and the Vikings of Berk. And how does he do this? Through compassion. Then, in terms of the writing, I think his character gets acclaim because the franchise goes out of its way to showcase that he has flaws, and these flaws often come back to bite him in significant ways. Then there's Stoick. In-universe, I think his best quality is that he has this father redemption arc and his love for Hiccup, which leads him to sacrifice himself to save his son during the second movie. Then, from a writing point of view, he definitely has an extreme amount of depth compared to the vast majority of characters in the franchise. You see him struggle to come to grips with his son, and it's very compelling to see him change over the films, to see him battle adversity, to work at bonding with Hiccup despite deep-rooted cultural bias that says his son's going about things all wrong, and then also the difficulty of being a single parent. He gets such a richly developed story that I can't help but feel that people really take notice. However, obviously, we're not here to talk about the big names today. I've already made plenty of videos talking about how great Stoick is, or how great Hiccup is, or what have you. Today I want to take a step back and talk about a character that I think gets a whole heap less acclaim and less esteem. That is, of course, as you know from the title and the thumbnail, Gobber. I do think that Gobber's a character that you might be tempted to overlook when it comes to these types of discussions. I feel like this is something that's rather common to a lot of characters who are considered comic relief. They get painted with this broad brush of, oh, they're just here to be a clown, and that's all they are. I don't think it's a very fair way to look at them, and it certainly isn't the case for Gobber. So that's what I want to do today. Give the rundown as to why Gobber's among the best characters in the franchise in both character and also just the way he's written. Okay, so I want to start off talking about the way in which his character's been written because I do find it rather impressive. I think it's fair to say that How to Train Your Dragon is a fairly serious franchise overall. It's not like Shrek or Kung Fu Panda, where every second line of dialogue's a joke or is a setup for a joke or where pretty much every single scene is going to be played for laughs. It is by no means devoid of humour and it's very funny, it's just interwoven into it very differently. All of the side characters are somewhat insane, and they do funny things and there can be funny situations, but it's not presented in exactly the same way. There are a number of exceptions to that rule, and one of them is Gobber. So here we have Gobber, who is an utterly ridiculous sort of man, not just with jokes, but with utter insanity and strange lines. I think in the confines of a more serious piece of media, it would be easy for a character like this to come across as unnecessary or out of place. Like he doesn't belong as one of the major characters. That he should be relegated to being a side character like a lot of the other Dragon Riders. We're dealing with some decently heavy topics in this franchise at times, and this guy's a walking gag reel with maybe, 2 lines of serious dialogue ever? I mean, it seems like he wouldn't fit, but he just does. He cuts right through the heart of it and introduces much needed levity. They just use him to make you laugh and enjoy that he's along for the ride, but not so much that his shtick becomes overly tired and stale. He never becomes too much for the dialogue to handle. You know how it can be in some films, where the comic relief character's probably used a little bit too much. It's like when Mater was the main character of Cars 2, it just didn't work. That's not the fate of Gobber though. He's never used to the point where his character and jokes become stale. Instead, I feel like they use just the right amount to bring a bit of flavour to a sequence. For me, a perfect example of this type of thing is when Gobber and Stoick go off in search of Hiccup in the second movie. When they find him again, he's in the company of Volker, Stoick's thought to be dead wife, and they have a bit of a moment. After she tried to preemptively argue with him about the fact that she never came back after she was taken away by the dragon and learnt the truth about them, he starts to sing and it's all sweet and romantic, until Gobber starts belting out a verse because he thought, well, aren't we all supposed to be singing? It's a very funny and quick joke. It doesn't linger longer than it needs to or spoil the moment because they quickly get back into things after that. There are more examples of this type of writing for Gobber across the franchise, but for me, this one's peak. However, it's not just that his comedy doesn't feel out of place and fits seamlessly within the world, it's also the vast majority of his lines are genuinely funny. There are so many lines from Gobber that just make me laugh so hard, which is rather rare for a film. I often find myself just doing that nose exhale thing, but with Gobber, I find myself chuckling along at the jokes. Reminds me of the early Shrek films in that regard, where the jokes are just absurd and hilarious and not at all overplayed. It also helps that despite his boorish and goofy character, he has a lot of variety as well. It'd be very easy to write him as an out-and-out oaf who's just there to look stupid and be laughed at, but often they have him blast people with some pretty cutting zingers. Take for instance when Hiccup's ranting about his dad not listening to him and not accepting him because he isn't some huge beefy warrior, and then Gobber just comes out of nowhere with the extremely harsh observation that it's not his build that troubles Stoick, it's his general demeanour and personality that actually disappoints him far more. However, that's not the only thing that I think warrants mentioning when we talk about how awesome the character of Gobber really is. I think when you look at his character in story, This dude comes across as such a good person overall. A good and loyal and deeply underrated character across the board. And yes, I know underrated is an overused term, but in this case it's actually true. So much of his memorability comes from being funny, and I think it gets forgotten just how awesome this guy is in so many ways. I mean, let's just go across the chronology of the films and you can see it, and I think it's extremely apparent in the first of the films. We need to look deeper into the overall storyline of the first How to Train Your Dragon movie and the character implications this has. The protagonist of said movie is obviously Hiccup, who over the years has had his own struggles for acceptance within Viking society at large. He seems to have no friends, and his own dad very clearly finds him to be shameful and pathetic. He doesn't really seem to have anybody on his side except for Gobber. And yeah, I know that he can sometimes perhaps be a touch hard on him, but considering their culture, he's pretty much the gold standard. When we're first introduced to Hiccup in the dragon raid on Berk, quite literally every Viking he comes across tells him to go back inside angrily and makes it clear that he is in the way. He makes his way to the blacksmith and meets up with Gobber, who instead of just raging at him like the others, engages in banter. They have a little bit of back and forth, and whilst it is a bit mocking, it's also clearly in good fun and isn't hurting Hiccup's feelings. Big time uncle vibes right here, and so clearly different in tone to when Hiccup's talking to his actual dad. In this section, it's also revealed that Hiccup's always been his apprentice ever since he was small. To me, this suggests that he realized very early on that Hiccup was never going to turn out to be some great dragon-slaying warrior, so it seems that he took him on as a favor. Good uncle figure, keeping him somewhat safe despite work in the forge during the battles. And then also keeping him around as an apprentice despite the fact that Hiccup is clearly not actually strong enough to be his proper apprentice. I mean, yeah, he is a little bit harsh to him overall during this time, but you also have to think about the context of what's going on. In that scene, Gobber's trying his best to talk Hiccup out of doing something overtly stupid, seeing as he's talking about how he wants to go out and try to slay a dragon to prove himself to the tribe. He's trying to ensure that this kid doesn't get himself killed. Besides, it's clear that this is their dynamic, and it's all bark with no bite. Hiccup doesn't get upset, and he even somewhat plays along with it. That's their thing. Later, after the disaster, yeah, he smacks him upside the head for being a dummy and not listening, but it's kind of well deserved. Plus, he also stands up for him. As Hiccup's walking back to the house, Snotlout waylays him to talk his shit, and what does Gobber do? He throws the kid to the ground and just keeps on walking. When they get back to the house, he talks to Hiccup about what's happened, and he tries to give him some worldly advice. To stop trying to be somebody that he's not and to embrace who he really is. Pretty much stepping up to be the father figure that Hiccup needs and giving him advice on how he should be living his life. It's good advice too, because that's ultimately what Hiccup ends up doing. Later on, Stoick assembles the tribe to prepare a scouting force to hunt for dragons, managing to get everybody to volunteer by telling him that anyone who stays behind has to spend their time looking after Hiccup. So we have this kid's actual father knowing that it sucks so much to spend time with Hiccup for any normal red-blooded Viking that he can use it as a threat to get them to do what he tells them to do. Meanwhile, Gobber steps up once again and 1. Advocates for Hiccup, and 2. Tries to get Stoick to understand his son better. He tells him that he needs to give Hiccup a chance in dragon training, and unlike his son, seems to have faith that Hiccup isn't going to just go out there and get himself killed instantly. He seems to get frustrated when Stoick goes out of his way to shit-talk Hiccup, but at the same time, being a good friend, he lets him vent it first and talk about what's bothering him. Then, being an even better friend, he helps him see the truth about what needs to happen. The Hiccup needs this, and you can't just wrap him in wool and lock him inside. I also noticed that in the scene where Stoick's talking his shit, you see a lot of similarities between Gobber and Hiccup. Everything that Stoick's complaining about, the not listening, the head in the cloud stuff going off hunting for trolls. That's all stuff that Gobber has seemingly passed on to him. I know that the second film tried to present Hiccup as Volker 2.0, but really, that's who he becomes once he can't kill dragons. At this early stage, it's him more acting like Gobber. You see Gobber phasing out of the conversation because he doesn't care much about what Stoick's saying. He starts focusing on that stone tooth of his. He only comes back into the conversation when Stoick mentions trolls to assure him that they exist. I feel like this indicates that he's the one who's actually been filling Hiccup's head with all these sorts of folklorish stories, further hinting that he's very much stepping up when it comes to the fatherhood type stuff. Then he also is snarking back to Stoick in the same way that Hiccup does. I really like this. Plus there's the context that he's worked as his apprentice since he was a little boy, which indicates that Gobber's been a big paternal figure in this boy's life. When Hiccup arrives at the training, Gobber's as kind as you can expect when trying to get him to brush off the bullying of his peers. He couldn't seem to care less about the other members of his class getting smacked around by the Gronkle, but when it comes to Hiccup, he panics and intervenes to save him from getting incinerated. I'm sure he would have intervened to save anybody who'd been cornered by the Gronkle, but I don't think he would have been quite so stressed out about it. Realistically, he's a terrible teacher of how to fight a dragon, chucking untrained kids into the arena to fight a dragon on their first day, but it is what it is. They're stupid Vikings. That's what they do. At the very least, he gives Hiccup a shot. Then he gives him credit where credit's due, and talks him up to Stoick when he returns from the dragon nest hunt. He makes him seem like a dragon whisperer, the likes of which Berk has never seen before. And when Hiccup's chosen to kill the dragon, he's super excited about it. When it all goes badly and Stoick leads the army to the island of the Red Death, Who is it that stands by his side to buy time against the dragon with the full expectation they're going to die grisly deaths? This guy, that's who. Then when the dragon riders make their entrance, he helps it sink into Stoick that whilst Hiccup's not exactly the same as him in every aspect, that he is Stoick's son in every way that actually matters. Then after the battle, he makes Hiccup a false leg. A much better one than he seemingly bothered making for himself, by the way. And he goes out of his way to design a new artificial tail fin for Toothless. And that's just the first movie. There's more than just this, I'll tell you what. On to the second movie. When Hiccup and Astrid go off alone, our man is right there with Stoick to attack Eret and his dragon trappers and bring them home. When Hiccup once again flies off and gets lost/kidnapped by Valka, who is it that goes after him? Stoick, his dad, and Gobber, of course. Loyal, faithful Gobber. He tries to alleviate his friend's worries by telling him that Toothless will keep Hiccup safe, but when they find his helmet, he looks pretty frightened. He is specifically included in the family bonding time when Stoick's reunited with Valka and Hiccup. He comes in clutch and swoops in out of nowhere to save Stoick in the fight with Drago, and then later on, he's running to try to single-handedly save Stoick and Valka from the new Alpha Dragon, even though he has absolutely no chance in hell of defeating it. Then, when he's needed, he turns right around and charges off with them to try to save Hiccup. After Stoick dies, he delivers a really powerful eulogy and offers Hiccup comfort. So across those first two films, what do we see? Beyond the comic relief. The first is a man who sees that his friend's having a hard time, and so he steps up to help. He not only provides a safe space for his friend to talk about his parenting issues, but he becomes a secondary parental influence and perhaps one of the only positive ones for years. He can be hard on Hiccup, sure, but it's not in the same way as everybody else, and the way Hiccup responds to him is very different as well, which I think says a lot. Plus, he's insanely brave and completely loyal to his family, like we see a number of times across these first two films. This brings us to the third film, where in the wake of Stoick's death, he stepped up once again to help Hiccup run things around Burke and be the voice of temperance in trying to convince him that they need to change things. He just engages in full dad mode to try to make him see that they're becoming overcrowded, whilst also trying to get Hiccup and Astrid hitched. He warns him about continuing to antagonize the trappers because he thinks it'll lead to a fight that they can't win, and that's actual sage advice. He is right. Of course, Hiccup isn't going to listen, and by the time the movie starts, it's too late to stop anyway, but still. Later on in the movie, he adjusts his approach and pivots from being a mentor/parental figure to Hiccup to being more of a friend, giving him the same advice that he gave Stoick, but this time, in regards to Hiccup letting go and letting Toothless pursue this romance with the light fury at his own pace. He doesn't let up in trying to guide and help his friend's son, and at the end of the movie he stands up with Valka as one of Hiccup's parents at the wedding. I won't touch on the shows because I don't have that much time, but we can take a look at Homecoming. Now obviously he's gone a little bit more off the deep end by this point in time, but I think it's so cute how he misses Stoick and how he wants to remind the young Vikings of Newburgh that Stoick was the man. Now that's loyalty. The dude could be resting in retirement, but he seemingly has had a statue made, he's had a tapestry made, he's going to write a script for the play that honors Stoick and the dragons, one that's very unflattering to Hiccup in the best of ways. Now that he's an old uncle, he can do whatever he wants and he takes the role of Stoick for himself and then breaks down reading the lines. But he's not too old to talk his shit at Hiccup when their model Toothless actually breathes fire and helps to ruin the pageant. And at the end, he's pretty much just an honorary granddad when he gets invited to their house for Snuggletopf. What an arc this man has across the films. He's truly the best guy in every respect. He's both well written, but also just a wonderful, wonderful character. And I know he's popular, but he should be way more so. Of course, though, in the end, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of Gobber's character? Do you see him in the same way as me, or am I giving him too much credit? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.